On a vibrant, lively day at a neighborhood diner, the golden rays of sunlight streamed into the room, where a young boy observed an unexpected event. An elderly couple was being chastised by a strict manager for misplacing their wallet, putting them in a difficult situation. Quietly, the boy covered their bill to spare them additional distress. Later, retracing his steps, he stumbled upon the lost wallet and returned it, only to find out that the couple was actually wealthy millionaires. Unbeknownst to him, his small act of generosity would soon intertwine their lives, initiating a chain of transformative events. Inside the mid-range restaurant, the air was thick with the mingled aromas of grilled steak, buttered vegetables, and freshly baked bread. Plates clinked against polished wooden tables. Silverware scraped against porcelain, and a low murmur of conversation floated through the warmly lit space. Ethan, seated near the entrance with his elbows on the table, felt his stomach twist with hunger. The laminated menu lay before him, the words blurring together as his gaze followed the plates carried by busy servers. His mouth watered at the sight of golden brown fried chicken, steam rising from mashed potatoes coated in thick brown gravy. His fingers twitched. The money he had in his pocket was barely enough for a meal, but he knew better. That money wasn't his to use. It was for his mother. At just 14, Ethan was already bearing the burden of decisions most kids his age would never have to face. Swallowing hard, he folded the menu shut, exhaling as he willed the gnawing hunger to settle down. One more hour, perhaps two. He could wait. He was there to meet his friend Lucas, who worked in the back kitchen finishing up his shift. Ethan's gaze shifted to the cash register, where a pale-skinned couple, dressed nicely and with rings gleaming on their fingers, counted bills nonchalantly, laughing among themselves. He quickly looked away, but then the shouting began. A sharp voice, edged with impatience, sliced through the ambient noise like a knife. "If you don't have money, you can't eat here." Ethan jerked his head up, seeing a table at the far end fall silent. A waitress hesitated nearby, her notepad clutched to her chest, uncertain whether to stay or leave. In the center of it all stood Rick, the owner, a heavy-set man with a face etched from years of scowling, towering over two elderly customers. They looked startled, with Evelyn gripping her scarf tightly and Henry patting down his pockets with trembling hands. Rick sneered, his voice escalating for everyone to hear. "Let me guess, you thought if you sat down and ordered a nice meal, nobody would notice you couldn't pay?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't run a charity here." Ethan's stomach twisted with discomfort. "Sir, we had our money. We must have dropped it somewhere." Evelyn's voice shook. "Please, just let us step outside and retrace our steps. We promise." But Rick cut her off with a scoff. "Yeah, sure. Like I haven't heard that one before." His gaze swept across the restaurant, looking for support. First it's, "I lost my wallet." Then it's, "Oh, please let me work it off in the kitchen." Like I'm in a movie scene. His lip curled. "You people always have a story." A few patrons shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. One man in a suit shook his head and muttered something under his breath. A woman dabbed her mouth with a napkin and glanced away. Ethan's nails dug into the wood of his table as Henry, still searching his pockets, released a shaky breath. "It must have fallen out when we got out of the taxi." Rick scoffed. "Oh, taxi. Wow. So you had money when you got here, huh? But now it's just magically gone. Convenient." "Please, we'll find it. Just give us a moment." Evelyn's voice cracked. Rick leaned down, his shadow engulfing them. "You hear that, folks? They just need a moment. Maybe we should all dig into our pockets and see if we can help out, huh?" He turned back to them, lowering his voice so only those nearby could hear, venom lacing his words. "You think because you're old I won't toss you out on your asses?" Ethan shot to his feet, the chair scraping against the floor, cutting through the tense silence like a knife. Eyes turned, the weight of 100 gazes fell upon him, but he didn't care. His heart pounded, fists clenched at his sides. Without thinking, he moved forward until he stood between Rick and the couple. "That's enough," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fire igniting in his chest. Rick's brow twitched as he straightened, arms crossed over his chest while he looked Ethan up and down. Oh great, now we have a little hero. Ethan held his ground. You don't need to speak to them that way. They didn't mean to lose their money. Rick's laughter was slow and deliberate. What are you going to do, kid? Lecture me on respect. They're not trying to scam you. Rick's eyes darkened. You don't know that. Yes, I do. A cruel smile crawled onto Rick's lips, something igniting in his eyes. Oh, I get it now. He stepped forward, his voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. You feel bad because they look like you, huh? Is that it? Sticking together. Ethan felt his breath catch in his throat. Rick smirked. Tell me something, kid. Are you planning to pay for their meal? Because if not, I suggest you sit back down and let the grown folks handle this. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Ethan exhaled through his nose, pulled his hand from his pocket, and slapped down a crumpled wad of bills onto the counter. The money he had saved for his mother's birthday, the money he had meticulously collected over months, doing odd jobs and skipping snacks at school, holding back when he wanted something for himself, lay there. Rick stared at the cash, and Ethan's voice didn't waver. Now you don't have an excuse. For the first time, Rick hesitated. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he swiped the money off the counter and shoved it into the register. Fine, he muttered, but don't come crying to me when they play you for a fool. Ethan didn't even acknowledge him. He turned to Evelyn and Henry, their eyes wide, expressions unreadable. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for his. You didn't have to do that, dear. Henry swallowed hard. We could have figured something out. Ethan offered them a small, tired smile. Everyone needs help sometimes. Evelyn blinked rapidly, then quickly pulled out a napkin, scribbling her number onto it. Our number, please. If you ever need anything. Ethan took it, nodding. They left quietly, and the restaurant hummed back to life, as people pretended nothing had happened. Yet, Ethan remained there for a long time, staring at the napkin in his hand, the weight of what he had done settling heavily in his chest. Ethan sat back down, fists tightening on the table, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The cash register clicked shut, sealing away the last of his savings, the last remnants of what he had pooled together for his mother's birthday. His stomach twisted with a slow, gnawing ache, not just from hunger, but from the burden of what he had done. He understood it was the right thing. He knew that had he walked away and let it happen, he wouldn't have been able to face himself in the mirror again. But that knowledge didn't make it any easier. The restaurant resumed its hum, as though nothing had happened. Conversations picked up, forks clinked against plates, and the scent of roasted garlic and butter wafted through the air, taunting him with what he had just forfeited. A couple at a nearby table stole a glance at him before quickly looking away. One of the waiters, a newcomer, hesitated near his table, as if wanting to speak, but ultimately just walked past. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling while exhaling slowly. He could still hear Rick's voice echoing in his mind. You people, you feel bad because they look like you, huh? His stomach churned. It wasn't the first time he had encountered such words, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. He wasn't ready to go home, not yet. Not prepared to sit across from his mom pretending everything was fine. Not ready to think about how tomorrow morning he would wake up with nothing to offer her but an apology. Oh, he lingered, keeping his head down, attempting to ignore the emptiness churning within him. About 15 minutes later, it happened. He reached for his phone, shifting in his seat when his elbow knocked his napkin off the table. Sighing, he bent down to retrieve it when something beneath the booth across from him caught his eye. It was small, stuck in the shadows beneath the seat, a slightly worn black leather wallet. Furrowing his brows, he stretched his arm, fingers brushing against the cool, smooth material, and pulled it out. Ethan flipped it open, and his breath caught. A photograph, slightly faded, was wedged behind a clear plastic sleeve. A younger Evelyn and Henry, smiling in front of a quaint little house with bright white shutters. His heart raced. It was theirs. The realization sent a jolt through him, and he jumped up, scanning the restaurant for them, but they were gone. Clutching the wallet, he pushed back from the table and moved toward the entrance, nearly running as he stepped outside. He turned left, then right. The crowded sidewalk blurred under the yellow glow of streetlights, yet the couple was nowhere in sight. Cursing under his breath, he tightened his grip on the wallet. He needed to act quickly. Racing through options in his mind, he made a prompt decision and turned on his heel, nearly sprinting down the block toward the police station 2 streets away. He understood the wallet was significant. That much was clear, and if there was any chance of returning it, he had to try. The station was colder than he'd anticipated, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. The officer behind the desk looked up as Ethan approached, scanning him for a beat too long before finally speaking. "Something you need, kid?" Ethan hesitated, then set the wallet down on the counter. "I found this. It belongs to an elderly couple, Evelyn and Henry. They were just at the restaurant down the street, but I lost them before I could return it." The officer stared at the wallet, then at Ethan, his expression unreadable. "You sure you didn't just find it somewhere else?" The words stung. Ethan swallowed, maintaining an even tone. "Yeah, I watched them lose it." The officer exhaled, muttering something under his breath, before taking the wallet and flipping through its contents. "We'll try to contact them if there's any info inside. What's your name? You got a number in case they want to reach you." Ethan hesitated for a moment before reciting his number. The officer scribbled it down, nodding. "All right, we'll take it from here." That was it. Ethan turned, stepping back into the night air, the cold breeze biting against his skin. He shoved his hands into his pockets and started walking, his insides still twisted in knots. He told himself he'd done the right thing, that the wallet would eventually find its way back to them, yet a persistent feeling gnawed at him, a sense of unfinished business pressing down heavily. By the time he arrived home, the apartment was dimly lit, the scent of cheap instant noodles permeating the air. His mother sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as he walked in, her brows furrowing at the weariness etched on his face. "Baby, what's wrong?" Ethan hesitated in the doorway for a moment, contemplating lying, considering saying it was nothing, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he exhaled, walked over to the table, and sat down across from her. Then he recounted everything. Isabella listened in silence, her fingers curled around the rim of her teacup, her eyes focused intently on Ethan's face. The dim kitchen light flickered, casting soft shadows along the walls. But all Ethan could perceive was the restrained tension in his mother's expression. When he finally finished, letting his words settle between them, Isabella exhaled slowly, setting her mug down with a gentle clink against the worn wooden table. "You gave them all your money." Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite place. Ethan shifted his gaze downwards, embarrassed, staring at the peeling laminate tabletop. "Yeah." There was a pause before, to his surprise, Isabella smiled, a small, tired smile, but warm. "Baby, you know what the best gift is?" Ethan swallowed, his stomach twisting again. "I was supposed to buy you something nice." "You did," she said softly, reaching out to rest her hand over his. "You helped someone who needed it. That's worth more than anything you could have wrapped in a box." Ethan felt his throat tightening. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that what he had done was enough. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, the weight of reality pressed down on him. No matter how right it had felt in the moment, the truth was, his mother's birthday had arrived, and he had nothing to give her but an empty wallet and an apology. Morning came too quickly, the sun barely peeking through the thin curtains, casting a faint, pale light across the small kitchen where Isabella stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Ethan sat at the table, pushing a spoon through his own bowl, watching the way the oatmeal clung to the edges. It was thinner than usual, stretched with extra water to make it last longer. He knew without asking that this was all they had left. His mother sat down across from him, offering a small, tired smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She slowly sipped her coffee. Black. No sugar. No milk. Ethan kept his gaze lowered. The silence between them stretched heavily, filled with unspoken thoughts neither of them dared to express. Then came a knock, sharp, firm, unexpected. Ethan's head snapped up, the spoon clattering against the side of his bowl. Isabella frowned, pushing her chair back as she stood. It was early, too early for visitors. A cold sliver of unease slid down his spine as she moved toward the door, fingers hovering near the lock. "Who is it?" A pause, then a familiar voice, muffled through the wood. "Evelyn and Henry." Ethan jumped to his feet as Isabella hesitated before unlocking the door. When it swung open, the older couple stood framed in the dim light of the apartment hallway, their faces illuminated by the flickering overhead bulb. Evelyn's eyes softened the moment she saw Ethan. "Oh, sweetheart, I had a feeling we'd find you here." Ethan blinked. "How did you?" "The police called," Henry replied, stepping inside and scanning the modest apartment. His gaze flickered over the fraying edges of the couch, the stack of overdue bills peeking from the counter. "They said a young man turned in our wallet. We knew it had to be you." Isabella looked between them, then back at Ethan, her brows knitting together in confusion. "What's going on?" Henry glanced at Evelyn, who nodded slightly before turning to Isabella with a kind smile. "Your son is a remarkable young man." A beat of silence passed. Then Henry pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, folded stack of bills, and stepped forward to offer it to Ethan. His stomach twisted. "No," he quickly said, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for money." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Oh, we know that, dear. That's exactly why we're here." Henry's expression grew serious. "We didn't just come to return the money you gave us. We came because we saw something tonight and we need to ask you something important." Ethan frowned. "Ask me what?" Evelyn looked at Isabella, then back at Ethan, her eyes gentle but firm. "How would you feel about a fresh start?" Ethan felt his breath catch. A fresh start? The word seemed too monumental, too impossible to hold any real significance. He looked between Evelyn and Henry, searching their faces for some hint of explanation, some indication that this was all just a strange misunderstanding. But their eyes reflected only certainty, strong and unwavering. Isabella stood frozen beside him, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater, confusion tightening the corners of her mouth. I don't understand," she said slowly, her voice careful, as if afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" Henry exhaled, tucking his hands into his coat pockets as his gaze roamed the cramped living room, the frayed edges of the couch, the water stains creeping across the ceiling. A single flickering lamp cast long, uneven shadows along the peeling wallpaper. An envelope sat half open on the counter, a bright red "Final Notice" stamped on its surface. The old radiator by the window rattled weakly, barely managing to keep the chill at bay. The air felt thick, not just with the scent of instant noodles and weak tea, but something heavier, the kind of exhaustion that accumulates in a place after years of struggle. When Henry spoke, his voice was steady and deliberate. "We know what you're going through." His eyes flickered to Ethan. "We know what you've sacrificed, not just tonight, but for a long time." Ethan stiffened. Evelyn smiled gently. "Because we asked." Henry nodded. "After we left the restaurant, we made a few calls. We asked around. Your friend Lucas was more than happy to tell us about you." He tilted his head slightly, regarding Ethan. "He mentioned how you've been working small jobs after school, saving every penny to help your mother. How you go without so she can have a little more. How you never ask for anything, even when you needed it. How you were willing to give up the only money you had to help two strangers." Ethan felt a twist in his stomach, shifting on his feet, suddenly self-conscious. It was as if the walls had been stripped away and he stood there vulnerable. He wasn't used to people having knowledge about him, people actually noticing. Isabella's voice was quiet. Why would you do all this? Evelyn stepped forward, her presence warm and grounding. Because, my dear, we're not just an old couple who lost their wallet tonight. She glanced at Henry and then back at Ethan. We are, in fact, quite wealthy. Ethan blinked, his brain stalling. Wealthy? Millionaires, Henry said simply, as if it were the most casual statement in the world. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Isabella sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers clenching the fabric of her sweater. Ethan barely moved or breathed as the weight of their words pressed down on him, a thick, invisible force anchoring him in place. He searched their faces again, looking for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke, but all he found was quiet certainty. Henry sighed, running a hand over his chin. We don't usually tell people that up front. It complicates things. People act differently when they know. He met Ethan's gaze, his eyes glinting with something fierce, something certain. But tonight, we met a boy who didn't hesitate to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. A boy who expected nothing in return, and that, Ethan, is rare. Ethan's heart raced in his chest as he struggled to find words. He had spent his life watching people with money move through the world as if it owed them something. He never imagined standing before people like Evelyn and Henry and hearing them speak about him as though he were the rare one. Isabella swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. What exactly are you offering? Evelyn's gaze softened. A new beginning. Henry nodded. We want to help, a proper home, a stable future, a chance for Ethan to attend a better school, to have the opportunities he deserves. And for you, Isabella, we can ensure you have work that pays you what you're worth. No more struggling, no more worrying about how you'll keep the lights on. Ethan felt the weight of those words, heavy and overwhelming, pressing down on him. He thought of the past few months, witnessing his mother lose sleep over job applications that yielded no responses, sitting in the dark when they couldn't afford the electric bill, counting quarters just to make sure they had enough for groceries. He remembered how, 2 weeks ago, his mother had finally sat him down, eyes red and weary, telling him that if things didn't change, he might have to leave school. Now, standing there, hearing these words, it all felt surreal. Why would you? His voice cracked, raw with emotion. Why would you do this for us? Henry didn't hesitate. Because we can. Evelyn smiled, a gentle, resolute smile. Because we should. Ethan felt a surge of emotion as he sensed Isabella's gaze upon him. He could hear her uneven breaths and feel the trembling atmosphere that enveloped them. He desired to vocalize something, anything, to confirm if this was real, to question whether this wasn't merely some elaborate dream that he would awaken from. But when he looked up, Evelyn and Henry remained there, steadfastly waiting, offering him something he had never dared to dream of. Hope. The weight of their offer, combined with the incredible improbability of it, pressed down on him like something vast and intangible. His mother remained rigid beside him, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles went white. The hum of the old refrigerator buzzed softly behind them, a constant reminder of everything they didn't possess. The bills on the counter, the dim light, the chill seeping through the thin walls, an unacknowledged truth they were too fatigued to confront. Now, two strangers, two people who had every reason to walk away, stood in their cramped living room, offering to change everything. Ethan's pulse raced in his ears, fists curling tightly as he stared at them, searching their faces for a catch, a condition, a reason. You don't even know us. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Henry exhaled slowly, measured, as if he had anticipated Ethan's protest. We know enough. His gaze flickered to Isabella, then back to Ethan, unwavering. We know that you've been surviving, not living, that you carry more than any 14-year-old should have to bear. We know you gave away everything you had without thinking twice, expecting nothing in return. He tilted his head slightly, his expression inscrutable. That tells us everything we need to know. Evelyn stepped forward, her presence warm and grounding. We don't do this often, Ethan, she said gently, But when we see something, someone worth believing in, we don't ignore it. Isabella let out a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. But this is too much. Henry's lips twisted into something nearly sorrowful. Is it? He glanced around the apartment, at the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the exhaustion carved into Isabella's features. Or is it just enough? Silence hung heavily in the air as Ethan's chest ached. He thought about the last few years, about how his mother had skipped full meals so he could eat more, how she had worked late shifts, exhausted and running on fumes, just to keep them afloat. He remembered the knot in his stomach when she revealed he might have to leave school and how he forced himself to smile and say, "It's okay, Mom, I'll help. We'll figure it out." What else could he say? His jaw clenched. He was unaccustomed to things getting better. He was unaccustomed to kindness without a hidden cost. He swallowed hard. What if we say no? Evelyn smiled. A quiet knowing smile. Then we shake hands, say goodnight, and leave. No strings. No expectations. Ethan's throat burned. He turned to Isabella, searching her face for guidance, anything that would tell him what to do. Her eyes were moist, her breath uneven. She reached out, cupping Ethan's face in her hands, brushing her thumb across his cheek as she used to when he was younger. "Baby," she whispered, voice trembling, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, releasing a long, shuddering breath. He opened them again, meeting Evelyn and Henry's gazes with something raw and unguarded. "Okay," he said, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Okay." Evelyn's smile softened, and Henry nodded, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Then let's get started. Join us in sharing meaningful stories by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.